As you well know by now, I am a big fan of ESEE Knives. However, I cannot leave well enough alone. These knives just scream, hey, modify me, and I'm happy to oblige. I have a batch of knives here that have kind of an interesting, convoluted, all over the place kind of story. I'd like you to stick around, and I'll quickly describe what I did with my ESEE 3s. I've got a knife time story for you today. ESEE 3. Let's start off with the fact that I used to have an ESEE 3 that was beloved. It was back when they were rat, and I heavily modified it, heavily modified the sheath, did all kinds of stuff to it. Carried it constantly. The green micarta handles took on a glorious patina. I put grooves in the handle. I put different screws in it from a collectible that I no longer have. But I was a member of the Rat Pack. They only made 50 of those knives. I had one. They had the orange handles and the special blade. And that's gone. But when I moved, not only did I lose a couple of other knives, but that knife is gone. I'm not going to accuse anybody of taking it, but I can tell you for sure that I didn't lose it, because it was one of those knives that was just out and always ready to be grabbed and used. I finally convinced myself that I wanted to try and recreate it, but not in exact form. So I bought a green-handled ESEE 3 mill, because that was the only one that I could find that had the handle that I wanted. So here is the knife. You can already see that I've started to stain it a little bit. That is garlic juice. I was mincing some garlic. I have already begun the process of modifying this knife. I initially put red liners in another knife, and those liners were too fat. So I got different plastic and manufactured liners for this knife, because even though I really like the flat scales, the knife is a little on the thin side right out of the bag, and a lot of guys don't have a problem with that. I don't really have a problem with it, but because I can do it, I prefer to make the handles thicker. However, making thicker handles requires you to have hardware to be able to accommodate the thicker space. I happen to have some of that because I have hardware from old ESEE 4s that I have a love-hate relationship with. I really like the ESEE 4. I find myself buying them, but they always wind up just in the parts box because, quite frankly, and this is really the only negative thing I say about ESEE, the 4 is just too thick. Knock about 1/8 of an inch off of the thickness of that knife, and I think you will see sales of that knife skyrocket. So I have red scales on here, which make this handle much more comfortable. You may be asking yourself, well, knucklehead, you did that. How are you going to get it in the sheath? Simple solution. You take these two rivets out, and this knife pops right in there. Isn't going anywhere. It's there to stay.
It's mini show and tell time.
My other dilemma is I have two of the first production run stainless steel ESEE knives. The first one that I got had kind of an odd blade profile grind. I don't know if somebody had knotted off while they were grinding the edge or whatever, but rather than having a nice continuous belly, it was kind of flat along here. So I didn't really bond with that knife. But I really like their stainless steel, and I stayed away from their stainless steel for a long time until I bought the Zancudo. But the Zancudo is a whole different story. I liked the knife, hated the handle colors, begged repeatedly for somebody to make different handles. That has finally come to fruition. But in the meantime, I got excited about their S35VN. I had a couple of spare 3D handles from other ESEE knives, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to make myself a custom SE3 first production run S35VN knife with the black and red 3D handles, and I made more liners, which again, of course, required more hardware, but as I've said, I've got buckets of hardware. And again, here's another black sheath, rivets out, knife in, tech lock, piece of cake to put on, mates up with the first hole. Second hole, you just have to drill it out so that the hardware will fit through there. I don't recommend using a power drill. What I recommend is, if you do not have an ALOX version of a Swiss Army knife, you should get one, because this is the best plastic drill ever invented. You can control, you bore in, it carves out a perfect hole, and then you come from the other side and you slowly can make your hole big enough so that the hardware fits through. Those are my two SE3s. Which one am I going to use more frequently? Well, quite frankly, I think I'm going to use the stainless, because I am not one of those guys that's out there constantly batoning the living shit out of a knife. So I really have no fear of this knife breaking. I know that Patrick broke one. There's video about it. I'll show pictures. I'll even provide a link to that video in the description. But he asked so much of that S35VN, and it finally failed. I'm not going to be doing that. So, for my purposes, hunting, skinning, some bushcraft, well, some work in the woods, work on the farm, this is going to be great. And why am I choosing this to carry more frequently than the carbon steel version? Well, good question. The S35VN is going to hold an edge much longer than the 1095. There's just no two ways about it. Now, ESEE in-house heat treats their 1095. They do a spectacular job. It's legendary. You can beat on this knife and count on this knife to get you through just about anything and to save your bacon. If I find myself having to venture out into that sort of situation, I am going to take this knife with me. I still enjoy using it. I want to see this handle patina more and darken and start looking old and grungy and what's the word I've heard? Rancid. I'll throw up a picture of one of their legendary SE3s that they were able to talk this guy out of to be able to show just how much use you can give one of these things. So that's when I would use this. But for what I use a knife for, I really don't need the carbon steel. There's another disadvantage to the carbon steel. In food prep, I know a lot of guys are a little curious or iffy or sketchy about the black coating. Unless you do something silly like I did in my video about my Izula and how I used it as an oyster knife, and then was wondering, I don't remember putting pepper on these oysters. It was black coating. I had scratched so much black coating off of that knife that I had all this black stuff in my oysters. Well, I picked it out. Now, if you're afraid of whatever chemicals are in this black stuff leaching into your food, then don't use this for food prep. But then I guess that means you're not going to take it out hunting and using it to skin your deer. That's when this comes into play. The S35 VN blades are shipped out and heat treated at a different location to the exact specifications and protocol as prescribed by Crucible Metals. So therefore, you are going to get a hard but tough blade. How do I know this? I have an inside source at ESEE. I really do. This knife is going to be much easier to maintain. It's going to hold an edge. You're going to be able to process deer and then cook with it when you get that deer back home. The other nice thing, G10 is less absorbent than micarta. It's going to be easier to keep this knife clean. Let's say you're cooking chicken and you have a bunch of raw chicken. Well, if you get that all over this handle, you're going to have to scrub the hell out of it and disinfect it to get it out of here, because micarta, especially this variation, is absorbent. There's a lot of fibers there, and it's going to hold on to that E. coli, which you don't want to happen. This will be easier to clean. So there. Now I've made your life more difficult. You're on the fence about which one to buy. You got to hem and haw. You got to decide. Do you want E. coli, or do you want to not have E. coli? Think of it that way. Put this back in the sheath. We don't need to go to the hospital today. That's that. Thank you very much for watching. I sincerely appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next one. Or you'll see me. How is that? I don't know.